Income Housing Coalition. And I am going to share my screen because I threw together some slides that will hopefully be helpful for today's conversation. Here we go. Because there's a lot going on and it's nice to have a visual aid sometimes. But I will be happy to pause for questions as well because again, there's a lot going on. But let's jump on in. So my name, couldn't have said it better myself. So let's
I don't
see.
even know what they call it.
Might want to.
And if folks want to go ahead and mute themselves, or Brian, if you can help with monitoring that, that would be really great. Thanks, Kim.
Of course. So first, let's talk about the continuing resolution that's being considered. So as Elizabeth said, on Tuesday, this continuing resolution was passed by the House. We are now looking at a vote in the Senate. The top line, the bill would cut about $13 billion in domestic spending from the previous fiscal year. That's of course because a continuing resolution maintains federal funding from the previous year. And so that $13 billion includes the money that would be lost based on kind of like inflationary raises that should go forward in a bill. So by maintaining flat funding, it's effectively a $13 billion cut to domestic spending programs. It also provides some funding adjustments for key federal programs. It provides an additional $6 billion in defense spending, and it provides some additional funding for some other key HUD programs. So that includes $3.6 billion for HUD's tenant-based rental assistance program, also known as TBRA or Section 8 Housing Choice Vouchers. That is an increase from what we saw in both the House and Senate draft bills, but it would still not be sufficient to cover the full cost of voucher renewals. And so it would lead to an estimated loss of about 32,000 vouchers upon turnover. And so that, of course, I know I don't need to tell folks on this call, but just for table setting, that's just when vouchers are no longer being used by family rather than being reissued to a new household on the wait list. The voucher goes away because there's no longer funding attached to it. It would also provide additional funding, $480 million for project-based rental assistance. We've been in contact with some of our colleagues who work more closely on PBRA funding, and they feel optimistic that that would be, it is not what they, and it's not nearly what they were asking for, but with programs' ability to kind of shuffle around funding and reserves, they are optimistic that that should be enough to continue operations for existing programs. There's additional money for Section 202, only $18 million, and additional money for Section 811, $48.7 million. We have not heard concerns from our partners who work more closely on those programs around those funding levels. But we'll certainly let folks know if there are any updates around concerns about how some of this funding shakes out. For homeless assistance grants, the continuing resolution gives the HUD secretary the authority to quote unquote repurpose funds made available for the COC builds program instead of funding COC instead fund COC renewals. So instead of providing funding directly for the homeless assistance grants program through the CR, it gives them the authority to basically not give out the COC builds funding for fiscal year 2024. A NOFO for the program went out last year, but the funds were never ultimately awarded. This maneuver is still expected to shortfall HUD's homeless assistance grants programs by about $168 million, which our colleagues at the National Alliance anticipate would impact housing services for around 20,000 people. I think the last count was around 18,600, the last I saw. The bill would also cut about $3.29 billion from HUD's Community Development Fund. And so that funding would mostly be the result of lost earmarks, which are, of course, those congressionally requested spending for community development projects. And some of those projects, of course, would have gone towards funding homelessness services and shelters, domestic violence shelters, other important programs. So that is also a loss to this. The bill would also not provide any additional funding for disaster recovery efforts, nor would it address what is a looming deadline for raising the federal debt ceiling to avoid a potentially catastrophic default on the national debt. I don't know if folks remember, I certainly try my try my best to block it out, but the last time we came across this issue was in 2023. And that's when we got the Fiscal Responsibility Act put into place, which put caps on federal spending in exchange for raising the debt ceiling for 2 years. And so now we are at that 2-year deadline where we are no longer going to be under the FRA caps for FY26, but we could very well see ourselves in another situation where we see new caps imposed in negotiations around the debt ceiling. So what happens next? Right now, the Senate is slated to vote on the continuing resolution today. I believe the vote is at 1:30 or 1:15. Because there is a 53-47 majority in the Senate, Republicans are going to need at least 7 Democrats to vote in favor of the bill. John Fetterman has already come out to say that he will vote in favor. There was a lot of posturing yesterday from Senate Democrats about not voting for the bill, and then Senator Schumer turned around and said, I'm going to vote in favor of it because it's better to vote for this bill than to push the government into a partial shutdown. That has really angered House Democrats and some members of the Senate Democratic Caucus, but that is drama for another call. So meanwhile, the Democratic appropriations leaders, Rosa DeLauro and Patty Murray, released the text of another short-term continuing resolution that would extend federal funding till April 11th. Frankly, they just don't have the votes to pass that short-term continuing resolution. So Democrats do in many ways find themselves in between a rock and a hard place, and whether to vote for this continuing resolution. Come on now. There we go. So our ask is contacting members and demanding that they pass a full year spending bill for HUD with full funding for voucher renewals. Even if the CR passes, we could still see maybe an amendment that would provide additional funding for voucher renewals. Yeah, but it's really so basically if we don't see this final CR passed, like Elizabeth was saying, if we don't see the long-term CR passed or the short-term CR passed by midnight tonight, we're going to find ourselves in a government shutdown, which of course carries with it all kinds of painful implications for the communities that we are serving and for the programs that we are running. So it's again very much kind of in between a rock and a hard place with FY25 appropriations right now. Oh, shoot. I guess that's all the slides I put together for now. But I will say just Elizabeth, I saw you on mute. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish up, Kim, and then we can see if there's some questions, and I might have one too.
Great. Awesome. So let's see what's going on. I will say that part of why Republicans, the irony of this too is that Republicans have historically really opposed a year-long CR because it's a wasteful use of funding. They want to do year-long, or they want to do updated bills every year in order to try to get, claw out some of the federal funding that from programs that they want. They're lining up behind this CR, even though it does provide additional funding for some programs that they would rather not fund, in part because the president has thrown his support behind it. And the president would like to see it pass so that they can start work on FY26. And if passed is prologue, we can anticipate seeing some really major cuts to HUD programs. During the first Trump administration, we saw presidential budget requests that would take anywhere between 12 and 16% out of HUD's budget. So yeah, we are certainly anticipating continued attacks on HUD's budget. Again, it's one of the other like weird ironies of all of this story too is that the White House's anomalies request provided even more funding for housing choice voucher renewals than what was ultimately included in the continuing resolution. So we're not sure what to make of both wanting to gut HUD and cut all of its programs and providing additional funding through the continuing resolution and through the anomalies request. So it's a very interesting and new dynamic that we're navigating and trying to figure out. Yeah, so that's where appropriations are right now.
So we have some time. If folks have questions for Kim, you could put some questions in the chat. I'll try to call on folks, but I know she said she was happy to take some questions. I had a question I wanted to start with, which was just kind of for you to help us understand a little bit whether within this particular continuing resolution, was there more authority than typically would be granted to an administration for the ability to make changes despite what's congressionally approved spending? Just trying to understand some of this dynamic around the concern with the continuing resolution and whether that is something unique in the continuing resolution as opposed to just kind of the authority that Congress honestly has been ceding already to this administration more generally.
Yeah, Elizabeth, that's a great question. So the answer is a little bit of both. So anomalies requests for continuing resolutions provide the administration with a little bit of it, like additional flexibility in deciding how that funding is going to go out. And yes, Pat, I'll be happy to share out the PowerPoint too. So anomalies requests provide a little bit of additional funding from the administration in deciding how that funding will be distributed. Which is why we see kind of like the messing around with the homeless assistance grants funding of like, oh, we're just going to shuffle this funding to this program instead of providing actual additional funding for homeless assistance grants. I think that too, and we're going to be keeping an eye out for this, but in granting that additional authority to the HUD secretary, I think that will also give him the ability to say like, oh, we're shuffling funds from the COC Builds program to homeless assistance grants, but in order to get this funding, you programs have to abide by our, our policies and our stipulations for receiving it. So I think that is another way of them trying to exert that pressure and that control over funding. And then, to your question more broadly too, Elizabeth, the question of impoundment and the president literally and the White House literally just saying, no, we're not going to release these congressionally approved funds. Yeah, that's a huge issue. We've been seeing that with FY24 funding. And again, I'm sure I don't need to tell folks on this program that we saw it with COC funding grants, with FIP and FAP funding for fair housing testing. One of the big issues around this bill particularly was Democrats trying to get language into the bill that would explicitly say that yes, the White House is going to respect the authority of Congress to distribute this funding and not do anything to try to hold up or impound it. And Republicans would not agree to that language. It is not in this continuing resolution. And so again, Elizabeth, to your question, to your point too, I do think that we're going to continue to see shenanigans and just really this administration throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks and what they can get away with. And that includes coming in and really doing the most to see what happens. Yeah.
Sue had a question in the chat about congressional earmarks, both for fiscal year 24, whether you've heard anything about that, and then fiscal year 25, what happened to those earmarks with this continuing resolution?
Yeah, so the FY24 earmarks that have been approved, that were approved in the FY24 spending bill are still going to go out. For the FY25 earmarks, though, those are not going to happen in the continuing resolution. That's really that's the 3.12 billion, I think, that was taken out of the CDBG program, is those congressionally directed spending requests. Yeah, so unfortunately, the FY 2025 earmarks, if the CR goes through, aren't going to, they're gone. Sorry.
Any other questions for Kim?
See a hand from Gretchen.
Oh, sorry about that, Gretchen.
Thank you so much for this overview. It's good to kind of see the bigger picture, especially with the continuing resolution. We're watching in real time the terminations of programs and the clawbacks. The Section 4, which is a capacity building program, has been terminated and clawed back to 2020. So any agreements are now being stop ordered. And so we're trying to facilitate that. And also through the Inflation Reduction Act and the greenhouse gas reduction, they have pulled back $2 billion from an allocation to the entity that LISC was a part of. So, you know, it's clear how they're pulling all the money back, you know, and why the $13 billion they can get to pretty quickly. So I just wanted to let people know that it's very clear that organizations that have any association to DEI or any, you know, work on discriminatory housing will be punished and extracted from funds, and as well as climate change. So there's clear strategy going on here that will likely impact many of us on this call.
Absolutely, Gretchen. Thank you for flagging that and sharing that. And just, you know, to point out to Allison's comment in the chat, we've heard FY24 earmarks are concerned they will get clawed back, and our HUD rep said that should be a concern. I agree. You know, to the point that Gretchen was just making, even though it would not be legal for the White House to impound those funds because they have been approved by Congress, I think that this administration, again, is going to be targeting anything that talks about DEI or fair housing or any of the other, you know, pieces that Gretchen just mentioned. And so I would anticipate the potential of those FY24 earmarks getting frozen if they're basically, I think the administration goes through and hits Control F on some of these funds and says LGBT or gay and says, oh, well, we're not funding those anymore. So yeah, I would echo those concerns, Allison, from your rep too. And thank you, Gretchen, for sharing that. Sue, I see your hand too. Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for all your great work, and thanks for the presentation you did earlier this week with this information too. So another question, and thanks for taking the earmarks, is that we're beginning to see some contracts come out around COC, especially around work on HMIS, and there's some language in there that is somewhat concerning, and want to make sure that people are reading language that are in contracts. Also, there seems to be some direction by HUD. You know, we know that there's not support in this administration for the Housing First model, and there's some direction, it seems like, that as the COC funds may come out and be contracts, is that there'll be an option not to continue doing supportive housing. Have you heard any of this kind of stuff?
I have not yet, but this is all very helpful intel. I did see Scott Turner released a COC, it was over friggin' Twitter, released a COC, here it is, update on the COC language yesterday. I'm dropping it in the chat. So I did see that, and it has a lot of stuff around DEI, stopping discrimination against religious institutions, which, again, I don't need to tell folks on this call that that's very nonsense. But yeah, so I haven't heard some of the specifics of that, Sue, but like I would love to follow up with you and just like to check in with our colleagues at the National Alliance to see what they're hearing too.
I did see, this is Patty, up in the Northeast, that there's a prohibition on using a housing first strategy in that in that text from Scott Turner.
Ooh,
Yeah, so that does
When-
have implications for supportive housing.
yes, it does.
Hey, everybody, Nancy from Center City Housing. So my understanding in reading it is that it says that it's not going to enforce the house, so that it's sort of like the furthering affirmative housing clause where they're not going to monitor that anymore. It doesn't mean that we have to stop doing it, but when they come and review us, they're not gonna monitor to make sure that we did housing first. That was my understanding in
That's
reading
good.
it.
Okay.
But I might, if other people are smarter than me, I'd sure be happy to hear about that.
No, I think that
Okay.
you were bringing like the optimistic update, Nancy, where it's like, oh, so appreciate that. And
Yeah.
Olivia, it looks like agrees. Oh, sorry, someone was trying to jump in.
Nope, I was just gonna say, Tamara had a comment or question in the chat about whether the HUD secretary will have any kind of, listening session, or the White House will. These are not atypical for those kinds of things to happen. So what have you heard about anything like that?
Oh, so great question. We managed to get in on a call with the HUD secretary just yesterday with some developers from national organizations. It was not great. I think the best way of describing Scott Turner is to say that he seems like he is an empty suit who is there to do whatever Donald Trump asks of him. We voiced a lot of our concerns around especially the cuts to HUD staffing. And it just thank you, Renee, and my boss, of course, Renee. Just very smile and nod. It was disheartening. We can certainly reach out to have another conversation. But as far as the White House organizing listening sessions around this, if they do, I don't think they're going to be inviting organizations like ours to the table necessarily, unfortunately, if they have those listening sessions at all.
Good to know. Thank you for that.
Any other questions for Kim?
Could I just ask real quick? I'm sorry that I'm asking a bunch of questions, Kim, but always great to have you on these calls. So the administration talked about internment camps for people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And we're seeing in some states where people even in shelters are being pulled out and thrown into jail. And just wondering if you're hearing any of this in regards to kind of direction and implementation process for that.
Geez, well, that's horrifying. I have not heard anything on that yet. But I am horrified to hear that. So we know, of course, during the first Trump administration, that was kind of the shift that they were taking around homelessness, with Robert Marbut in place and like his infamous work in Florida and doing exactly what you're saying, Sue, basically setting up camps for people who are experiencing homelessness. And so we've been anticipating something like this coming down the pike, or something like an executive order around homelessness. But it is not, I have not seen anything to that effect yet. But Sue, please do follow up, because that's horrific. And if that is happening, we should be telling our friends at the Alliance and probably the media or something. I don't know. That's the worst thing I've heard today. And my job is basically hearing terrible things. So yes, thank you for flagging that though.
Okay. I'm not seeing anything else. Maybe just last call for any questions for Kim. All right. Kim, thank you so much.
Of course.
Really, I was just looking at the chat, something else
Same.
popped in there, but it looks like it's not a question for you. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting the update and the opportunity to do some Q&A with you. That was really helpful.
Of course, so happy to join. And please do feel free to reach out. We are about to be in our conference mode, but I will be happy to respond as soon as I have the capacity to. And hope to see many of you in DC in a couple weeks.
All right, excellent.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, I am going to just throw up some slides so that we can maybe share what we know about updates on staffing and then on program funding. And I hope that I can share what I know. And then if there's other intelligence from folks on the call, that would be really appreciated. So hang on here. Let me try to make this work. Are folks seeing the regular full screen or something different?
We're seeing the view where we can see the next slide as
The
well.
next slide, okay.
So
there
the
it is.
swap displays is what you want to hit.
Where is it?
Top left of, yep, right there.
There we go. All right, so sorry. Okay. So we've been sharing information for the past few weeks about staffing cuts that have been in the news, proposed for HUD, USDA, FHA, and Ginnie Mae. And I thought it was just important to share, like, we haven't heard anything different about those staffing cuts, but have not seen any official reduction in force notices issued beyond kind of the two things that have been in the news, which is the termination of probationary employees, and then the fork in the road email that was sent that prompted some resignations. The other thing I will just say is that there has been a lot of legal activity around how the Trump administration is moving forward with staffing cuts. And we had reported about Merit Systems Protection Board order last week, which was focused on USDA probationary employees. But just yesterday, there was news about two separate courts that had ordered reinstatement of probationary employees. So two different cases, but kind of in the same subject arena. And just wanted to check if there's anything different that folks have heard about reductions in force being issued. All right. So the other thing we've been continuing to kind of source information from all of you on is what's happening with disruptions to funding. And we just kind of talked a little bit about this together with Kim, including about the COC funding in particular. There have been some updates just in, I think, some of things that have been anticipated, but now either particular cancellations have actually happened or other things like that. Thanks, Gretchen, for, again, talking about what's happened with Section 4. We have been anticipating that there would be some action around fair housing contracts, and in the news this week was news that Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid had their contract canceled for performing fair housing work and some testing activities. And nationwide, we've been hearing that. And I know that there has been a lawsuit filed this week around this topic. The other thing that we've been talking about for the last few weeks is the intention to pull back, claw back, freeze Inflation Reduction Act related funds. The thing that is maybe a little bit newer this week was there were some news articles that the FBI has contacted Citibank to recommend a 30-day freeze on their distribution of the 20 billion for green lending. And then at the same time, there are several lawsuits that have been initiated by entities who were awarded funds, including the Climate United Fund, MNCEFA, which is Minnesota's Green Bank, is a recipient of funds through the Climate United Fund. And I think I saw that they are having an emergency meeting to discuss litigation either today or Monday. And then last, we've also been talking about cancellation of awards in the Green and Resilient Retrofit program, with Minnesota having one project awarded, and that was to Common Bond for a project of theirs in St. Paul, homes in St. Paul. And there was a more official announcement this week about termination of that program at HUD. And so just want to open the door and see if there's any other information folks want to share about what's happening with contract funds. I also appreciate folks sharing what, they've been hearing about earmarks that they may be working on.
So I put the comment in the chat, and sorry, I was late to the meeting. What I was trying to say was we received the new template of the HUD contract yesterday, which I don't know if others have seen or if it was discussed, but it says you have to comply with all executive orders, and then it names the executive orders related to immigration, not having any programs that are related to DEI, not using any funding to promote gender ideology, like they're specifically named. So I think that's going to be a discussion at our board this coming Monday about whether or not, we can sign this contract, but I didn't know if anybody else had shared this information or had, yeah.
And what type of funding was that a contract for?
That's a HUD COC.
COC.
Permanent supportive housing.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Tanya. Gretchen.
Yeah, I know that it says that there's a freeze. LISC has been under pause with the GDRF funds for quite a long time, but recently it's been internally determined that it's gone. So I don't know if this is kind of dated or if there is kind of a further action here with regard to the Inflation Reduction Act funds, but as you can see from the terminated common bond funding, it is suspect that they're not going to authorize it anymore.
Yeah, thanks, Gretchen. And maybe before I send out the slides, I'll kind of do a correction or clarification on that slide. That was intended to refer to the FBI, the FBI's what was reported about what the FBI is asking, which is separate from what the administration is doing to claw back the whole fund. I mean, not fully separate, but it is a more specific action that was new, as opposed to kind of the general announcement about what's happening, with the greenhouse gas reduction fund. So I'll make sure to clarify that. Thank you. Sue.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And it sounds like at least what we're hearing from across the country with the National Coalition is that contracts that are expiring right away, that those are the ones that are going out on COC right now. So just really encourage people, as was just mentioned, is to really look at the language and to make sure that you either make adjustments in your language or decide if you're going to do the contract or not. I know that APT, which is a technical assistance provider, is still being funded under HUD for at least HMIS and some other areas, it appears. So there is some technical assistance that HUD is still funding.
Okay. Thank you.
This is Margaret. One thing I would throw out about those COC contracts as well, too, that's really important to look at is that some of the prohibitions apply to the use of COC funds, others look like they're written to apply to all organizational activities. And I don't know if that's going to end up in final contracts, but as people are looking at those grants, there is some language in there that is incredibly vague. It has no meaning at all. But that doesn't mean that HUD won't, or the administration won't issue guidance about what those things mean, and that they could, in theory, apply to any activity, whether it's governed by this funding or not. It could have broad prohibitions that could lead people to be in violation of their contracts without even knowing it.
Thanks, Margaret. Let's move on to just talk a little bit about action and any folks who've had interaction with our Minnesota members of Congress. I know a lot of folks have been going to DC. We had put out the announcement about March 10th being the day of action. And I know some other partners did some variety of activities. The final letter that NLIHC had coordinated had over 1,500 organizations signing, with about 50 from Minnesota. So we ended up really kind of upping that participation. I'm going to be forwarding some letters that are still open for signature around supporting the Section 4 and then also supporting the rural capacity building technical assistance programs. So that will be in a follow-up recap email. And just, I think the encouragement is that we are really still continuing to be in relationship with the offices of our members of Congress. Some of you have done a lot of that already. Some of you that might be a little bit new, and trying to figure out what we need to do to help support you in that. So again, we'll be sharing out this shared resources Google folder. I think we're also going to be looking at whether some of the materials that aren't modified as frequently maybe could be hosted in another place, that just to make sure that this information is accessible. But in this folder, I have updated it since this past Monday. It includes information and a suggested meeting agenda for meeting with members of Congress, how you would request that meeting, a template for that. And a new item just put in there today is, and linked here, is a report that the National Association of Affordable Housing Lenders just put together that has some talking points and information more generally about what is the cost of these staffing cuts and potential funding cuts. What would those kind of cuts result in with the programs and activities of HUD, USDA, and the Treasury? So one of the items that's in the shared Google Drive and that we've been sending out is a way you could just do kind of a one-time call. You could use this as a template. You could modify it and have your own message that you leave. Congressional offices, these calls do matter. They count calls, they count issue areas that their constituents are concerned about. So this is one of many types of activities that we're encouraging. We've also in here continued to update our messaging tips. And we'll continue to update messaging with feedback that we hear from you about what's important to share with members of Congress and their offices, and also use feedback from our national partners on what they're hearing are important messages to be able to share. Again, just trying to support you with a whole variety of resources. Steve.
Sorry, slow to unmute. On this topic, I just want, in case people are not as far along with these relationships, I will just say that each one of the congressional offices has been really, really excited to hear from us about the very specific nature of our contracts and what's at risk, and really wanted that information in great detail for the benefit of the ongoing meetings. So if you are not doing that already, I would strongly encourage everyone on here to, as much detail as you can give them. They seem really happy to get it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chair. Just kind of along those lines, wanted to share some opportunities, and then it would be good to hear maybe from others in addition to Steve on what's been happening as you've been meeting with Minnesota members of Congress to help inform us. But you know, Congresswoman Morrison with the 3rd Congressional District, she is a new member of Congress. Housing isn't like, I'm not saying that she's opposed to housing, but it's just not been her focus. She's very much a healthcare focused person. You know, she's a doctor. And she's having a town hall, hearing from hearing about housing, I think will be important to her. I know when I had reached out to her office before, she had sent me an inquiry about, well, what are other organizations that are working on this issue, or who are you partnering with? So she clearly wanted to know more. And then we have some other opportunities here for Congresswoman Fischbach having mobile office hours. And then we've been working with partners for some small group meetings, kind of like what Steve's doing, I think, to just, again, have a little bit of FaceTime. Meeting with staff is not a step down from meeting with the actual member of Congress. They will pay close attention to what you say. They will be briefing the member of Congress on what they hear in these meetings. It's a very important meeting. So we have some FaceTime with Congressman Stauber's staff and Congressman Finstad's staff coming up. And this is in addition to what all of you are doing. Have others had some feedback? I know Nellie from Minnesota Housing is on here, and I just want to make sure we had an opportunity to hear what you've been hearing or any other feedback.
Sure, yeah, I can give a brief overview. So the Commissioner Ho, Ryan, and I went to DC Monday through Wednesday of this week for our trade organization's HFAs on the Hill event. And we were able to meet with all 10 offices of our congressional delegation. And then we were able to meet in person with Representative Omar, Representative Finstad, and Senator Smith. I would say that we broadly received very, very positive messaging about housing from our representatives and from our senator, and that they're very supportive. I'll say they really requested, like, anything that's directly impacting you or your constituents right now, they really want to know about it. We talked a lot about our concerns with HUD staff potentially being cut, funding freezes, and how that's affected us. They took really copious notes, like Elizabeth was saying, so please make sure you're reaching out to your folks. I will say another thing that was very interesting is that DC was packed. So it was very clear that there are many, 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 many different people and organizations that are very worried right now and that are going directly to see their congressional members. So that was very heartening to see. And yeah, I would say, you know, from our meetings, it seemed generally positive. You know, Stauber's office could use a little bit of a boost in, you know, hearing from constituents about how things are affecting them. But generally pretty good time, and got a lot of active listening. And they definitely came back and told us, please tell people to give us specific instances, give us numbers, give us, you know, stories of what's going on, because that's the most impactful, both in their messaging and to their staff's Congress folks.
All right, thanks so much. It's good to hear. I just want to say, I know lots of folks are doing all sorts of different things. Want to continue to make sure we're providing resources that help you do the things that you are able to do, whether that is that direct outreach to a member of Congress's office, whether that's making a quicker phone call. All these things are important. Let's see. Shannon, did you want to share anything from NARO's perspective? I think there's a lot of folks where that would be helpful to hear from you.
Sure. Good morning, all. Yeah, I think this is Shannon Guernsey, and I'm with Minnesota NARO, and then NARO stands for the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, for those of you who don't know what the acronym means. Yes, like Nellie mentioned, we also met with the full delegation. Most of our meetings were with staff, and I think that is with so many. They were listening. They're very interested in local impact and how these dollars flow into their districts and community. So that is what we focused on. And I would just say the other thing was, it was very clear with so many moving parts and things in flux that we will be focusing on trying to follow up regularly with them. And again, kind of hitting those same points. The economic impact, the disruption that would cause at the local level, and the households and not being served by either their action or inaction, depending on what we're talking about. So we also saw it, especially as a number of the folks that we met with, as you know, quite a few of them are newer to this whole thing. So we are going to be continuing to be a resource. So I would just echo that, continue to reach out, provide those, the real impact stories. It's that seems to be the most helpful, and then broaden out from there, the larger impacts of what it means.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Well, that's about what we have for today. Just a couple of announcements. One is that thank you to Margaret Kaplan and Housing Justice Center. They facilitated a meeting with some partners who wanted to talk about legal issues this week. And it's clear things are very much in the kind of collection of information phase, but I know Housing Justice Center and other legal partners are trying to make sure that they are on top of what may need to be some impact litigation or other cases that might be filed relating to what's happening. So that is in progress, and we'll send out a written update on that. And then one other thing I'll just say is that I do not think we're going to have another one of these meetings in 1 week. I think it feels like we're able to maybe reduce the frequency just a little bit. And so we'll send out a notice about that, but I think we'll probably meet in 2 weeks. And unless something is happening that feels like we want to gather before then. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Yep. Be strong.
Mm.